We'll just wait a little while everybody gets online. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar this evening on the new draft Willoughby Comprehensive LEP and DCP for Castle Crag, Middle Cove and Castle Cove. My name is Norma Shanky-Williams, and I'll be presenting this evening with my colleague Ian Shillington later on in the webinar. And this is an additional webinar for the Castle Crag area that we've agreed to present. Though I should remind you that in fact there is a recording from last week's Castle Crag webinar available to be heard and observed on our website. On behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people make and their cultures have made and still make to the nation we share, Australia. Before I get into the webinar, I think I'll ask Jason to cue a short video for us that explains the background to the draft LEP and DCP. Thanks, Jason.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments, and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the Local Environment Plan.
The Local Environment Plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the Local Environment Plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The Local Environment Plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So I do hope you found that of interest. I think it's a very useful video to give you a flavour of the LEP and DCP changes that are planned during this exhibition. So in terms of how the webinar will run this evening, I will be presenting the bulk of the webinar. As I said, my name's Norma Shanky-Williams, supported by Ian Shillington at the Castle Crag specific section of the webinar. You'll find that there are common slides in all the webinars that we're providing, because we want to be sure that they're consistent and set the context of all the changes that are being proposed. And this webinar particularly is a rerun, more or less, of last week's session that we did for Castle Crag. There's an important message from the Northern Sydney Local Health District about healthy built environments. And because this is an additional webinar, we couldn't get, as we usually do, a colleague from the LHD to come and present those slides. So I'll be doing my best this evening to provide that overview of those slides. And this evening we have 4 councillors, I understand, present in the webinar. We have the Mayor, Mayor Tanya Taylor, and we have councillors Samuel, Moratelli and Erickson also present. So welcome to all of you this evening. The questions can be submitted at any time in the Q&A function of the Zoom. So please, if you have any questions, please put those into that Q&A function. And staff will respond tonight if these are straightforward questions, and if they prove to be a little bit more challenging, we will certainly answer them within 10 working days on the Have Your Say part of the website. I'll be taking some questions at the end of the webinar. Although it talks about alternating between the chamber and online, normally we have people in the chamber as well as online, but tonight we only have people online. So I'll be taking questions from the webinar. Any comments you want to make or any feedback you want to give, please put those in the chat function of the Zoom rather than the Q&A function, please. And cameras, of course, are switched off and microphones muted so we don't get background noise. This webinar, in common with the one last week, will be recorded and available on Have Your Say by the end of tomorrow. And those questions being asked, this is probably not a message that needs to be talked about this evening, because nobody will be recorded in the chamber. So it's not an issue for this evening's session. The agenda tonight I'll provide some strategic planning background to the LEP and DCP changes and talk about some state government changes that are also on foot. The Northern Local Health District, Northern Sydney Local Health District slides, I'll provide some overview of those, talking about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby, a very important aspect of the work we're doing. And then we'll have some specific issues about Castle Crag Local Centre and the changes in the draft LEP and DCP. And Ian will talk us through those. And then there'll be more general issues that I'll talk over for the draft LEP and DCP for the peninsular suburbs, Castle Crag, Castle Cove and Middle Cove. Then there'll be an opportunity for questions, and then we hope to wrap up the webinar by 7:30 this evening. The headline changes for your information in the LEP, if we were to pick out the eye teeth of those, it's about growing the Chatswood CBD to the north and south along the railway corridor, in line with the CBD strategy adopted by council and publicly exhibited. Also to increase density in a range of local centres that were studied in our local centre strategy and adopted by council and also publicly exhibited. There's more height and density proposed in our industrial zones in line with our industrial land strategy, which was also went through the process of adoption by council. We also have introduced a new design excellence requirement. We've increased the affordable housing requirement from 4% to 10% is one of our main proposals. And we seek to manage urban heat impacts into the future with new controls in the draft LEP and DCP. The alignment of our residential controls with the state government code set, exempt and complying development, is also a major headline change, as well as inclusion of landscape controls in the LEP and the DCP. And it's also worth mentioning from the DCP into the LEP, I should say, elevated from the DCP into the LEP to give those landscaping controls strength. The Griffin Centre is also being proposed as an item of local environmental heritage, local heritage importance. So that will be included in the LEP too as a potential item of heritage significance. In terms of the development control plan, we are strengthening our heritage controls in the DCP to make sure that we cover things like semi-detached housing and other controls that we felt were a bit light on in the current DCP. And there's also a proposal in part of the DCP to reduce our parking requirements, particularly around railway precincts, those being Chatswood, Artarmon and St Leonard's, where the ability to get access to public transport is greater than other precincts, of course. And there's a 12-week exhibition period that we're putting on for this LEP and DCP. So we really hope that that's going to be sufficient time for the community to have a look at the controls, have a consideration of whether we think we've got them right, whether there needs to be changes to them or things included that we have overlooked. And we will then conclude the consultation period after 12 weeks. The process that we followed thus far for the new comprehensive draft LEP was based on our specific strategies that we prepared in preparation over the last 4 or 5 years to guide the future LEP and DCP. So those are our CBD strategy, our local housing strategy, our local centres strategy, industrial lands, and we've also done work on integrated transport. And the state government has done work on St Leonard's Crow's Nest. And of course, the Greater Sydney Commission prepared from the region plan, the North District plan, covering Willoughby as one of the North District councils. So all of that strategic work has been valuable in setting the foundation for the new draft LEP through the work we did on our local strategic planning statement, which was adopted by council in 2020 and was a requirement that came out of the North District plan. Every council must prepare a local strategic planning statement to guide strategic planning for the next 20 years. And that has informed our draft LEP, our planning proposal as it's called, which went to our local planning panel for advice and was reported to council and supported by both for referral to the Department of Planning and Environment for what's called a gateway determination to allow us to go on exhibition. And that gateway determination was given, and so we are now currently on exhibition with a required minimum of 28 days, which is way too short, of course, for the sort of detail and complexity of this work that we're doing under the LEP and DCP. So here we are at the moment on exhibition now. The current Willoughby LEP 2012 started to be thought about and worked on in 2006 and was exhibited in 2010 and was re-exhibited in 2012. So it took some time, as this one has, with our strategic work preparing for the draft LEP. It came into force in 2013, so it's now 9 years old and has already been amended 22 times. So it's really ripe for refreshment. And indeed, it's required of us by the state government that we align our local planning with the district planning that's been done under the Greater Sydney Commission's region plan. The local strategic planning statement, which I referred to before, is a requirement of the GSC for all councils to prepare, and it sets the 20-year vision for priorities and actions across the entire local government area. It's a very comprehensive document. It really covers things that are very difficult to translate into controls in LEPs and DCPs, but it provides, we're required to provide land use controls to achieve the outcomes we sought in the LSPS in terms of housing, transport, heritage, and all of those things listed in that final dot point, and deal with climate change, resilience, social infrastructure, and collaboration. So it's a very comprehensive document that guides and directs us in our LEP to achieve the targets and objectives that are set out in that LSPS. It's a very important tool for us to frame our LEP and DCP around. And of course, as I mentioned before, the draft LEP drew from the strategic work we've done already and drew from the conclusions and recommendations in those other strategies that have been through extensive community consultations since 2017. So many of you have already worked with us and the team in preparing these drafts and then final strategies that have covered our local centres and the CBD, our industrial lands, housing and transport. And of course, the state government involved all 3 councils in St Leonard's, ourselves, North Sydney and Lane Cove, in the St Leonard's Crow's Nest 2036 plan, which they issued, and we are now, it's incumbent upon us to weave into our LEP and DCP. It'll also assist us in responding to the new Resilient Willoughby strategy and action plan, Resilience, of course, is a very important issue into the future for every council and every community across the world, you'd have to say, not just limited to Australia. So Council's Resilient Willoughby strategy strives for resilient places to withstand climate change and sustain biodiversity and support vibrant, connected communities. So these are the objectives that have driven the way we've formulated the controls and provisions in the LEP and DCP. To address the decline in urban biodiversity and tree canopy, we want to arrest those changes and the reduced availability of green infrastructure. Green ways to better connect our green spaces and enhance opportunities for residents to enjoy nature, improve fitness by walking and cycling. And you heard Dr. Deborah Deering from the GSC talk about those things on the short video we saw. And to protect and extend the urban tree canopy, including green walls and roofs on new high-rise buildings. We're also looking not just for resilient places, but to plan for resilient buildings, which are safe, well-designed and affordable and sustainable. And also to provide an enhanced affordable housing offering so that we have improved access for vulnerable people and key workers through that increased supply of affordable housing. And to respond to the extreme heat impacts which do affect the comfort of homes and the productivity and health and sustainability programs to address thermal comfort in the built environment, both in and out of doors. So that's quite a tall order. I think it's probably important to remember or to reflect on the key statistics for Willoughby in the future planning that we're doing. And as also mentioned by Dr. Deering in the short video we saw, COVID has impacted the pace of change, but that's not to say that we won't be growing into the future. It's inevitable that we will. So the population is expected to grow from 78,000 back in 2016 by about 14,000 people to almost 92,000 in 2036, which is the date of our planning horizon, 2036. The number of dwellings is expected to grow by over 6,700 as well in that period. We had a 5-year dwelling target given to us in the North District Plan of 1,250 new dwellings up to 2021, which we've met. But clearly that need for more dwellings is going to increase as our population increases. So that is incumbent on all local governments in metropolitan Sydney to respond to the growth of Sydney and respond to the need for new housing supply. And not only housing supply, also the number of jobs needs to grow so that we have our economic prosperity considered. And that's expected to grow from 64,000 to 74,600 in 2036, which is with a jobs target specifically for Chatswood CBD, which is a strategic centre in Sydney. And there is an important jobs target of 6,000 to 8,300 jobs for Chatswood CBD. At the same time as we've been doing our changes to the LEP and DCP, the state has also been extremely busy in doing reforms to the state controls and state legislation. Some of those have already taken effect, and this one has changes to the names of the environmental zones. So on December 2021, the government changed environment zones to conservation zones and reached straight into the LEP to make that change. So the former E-zones were those that are listed in that second dot point, and the new conservation zones in the LEP are now those ones that you see. So it's just the name change that has occurred. And of course, the C4 zone, the environmental living zone, is well represented in the peninsular suburbs that we're looking at this evening. Environmental living zones are quite extensive throughout this area. Also planned, but not yet conducted, is a change to the zones for employment, industry and business zones. And those are proposed at the same time as our plan is on exhibition. So those state changes to B and IN zones will replace 5 new employment zones and 3 supporting zones under the standard instrument. So the new zones wrap up our local and neighbourhood centres into an E1 local centre. Our commercial centre, which is B3, which is the commercial core, becomes an E2, and so on. They have changed the names, but also changed some of the uses that can actually occur in those zones. So there are transition details on exhibition with Council's draft LEP at the request of state government at the moment. and the outcomes of that exhibition will be reflected in the final LEP. So this is something you can also make your voice heard on if you have any particular concerns or comments to make on those change to the IN and B zones. Now I would normally hand over to a colleague from the local health district, but of course, as I said earlier in my introduction, we don't have a person from the LHD tonight. But what they do is they remind us how important creating a healthy built environment is for Willoughby, and remind us that our LEP and DCP controls should be absolutely clearly focused on creating a healthy built environment. We have health involved because this is integral to the importance of a healthy future for all of our community. And it's not about just building and growing, it's about creating a healthy built environment, as I say. So I have a couple of questions on the next slide, which my colleague from the health district would normally ask. So I'm asking you tonight, what makes you feel healthy? If you ever thought about that, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? We'd like to actually hear what you think about that tonight. So if you could put your responses into the chat function in the Zoom call, we'd be very pleased to see what your reaction is to that question. It's about access to healthy food. It's about access to nature. It's about living within a strong community and being able to access ease activities that we both enjoy and make us healthy. So one of the most important documents is the Healthy Built Environment Checklist that has been proposed, more than proposed, it's been published by the Department of Health. And this talks about 11 checklist themes that we should be conscious of when creating healthy built environments. So we're looking tonight at those 11 themes, and livability is a very important element of all of these themes to make sure that what we build, what we create through our LEP and DCP creates a really livable environment for us all. Neighborhoods where we feel we can walk in safety and in comfort, so it's shady and cool in the hotter weather and protected from wet weather. Communities can feel connected and can feel that they can, you know, just meet each other in a very relaxed and natural way when walking through their local communities. So we want places that people feel safe, comfortable, and can enjoy their local environment. We also want to create opportunities for active transport or active recreation. So that means walking in a comfortable and pleasant environment, and also being able to maybe cycle or scoot through pathways and networks linking other open spaces to one another. These are also very important in planning for a healthy built environment. Also having meeting places, places where you can just meet your friends, your neighbours in the local area, and you don't have to plan to do that. These chance meetings are very important for communities that feel connected and to create good, cohesive communities. So we need to create places that people can just dwell without needing to spend any money on a coffee. You can just linger in an area that you feel is comfortable and safe, and creates that opportunity for a community to feel that they are, as I say, cohesive, and you can get to know your neighbours and feel comfortable in your local neighbourhood. We'd also need to create opportunities for active living, pathways and parks where people can actually go and play, to walk their dogs, and have access to good active transport and public transport. So these are all aspects of a healthy built environment that we're trying to create through our new LEP and DCP. What you see here is a very sort of stylized healthy neighborhood design with centrally located destinations such as primary schools, community centers, and open space, with higher density residential around those areas with also some open space close by and nearby retail, with good traffic connections throughout the neighborhood. Of course, when we're planning in existing areas, that are already developed. We can't create the ideal location, the ideal built environment, but we can do much to improve it and make sure that we create the elements of a healthy built environment in the work we do under the LEP and DCP now. Housing diversity is one of the things that we are trying to create through the new LEP. So we're protecting our R2 zones, which are the family housing with gardens. We think they're very valuable elements of Willoughby's makeup and character. So those are areas that we're really intent on providing a consistent approach to, while providing diversity through medium and higher density housing for different requirements, whether it's people at different points of their life cycle or people in different income levels. We need to provide that diversity of housing if we're going to create truly resilient communities into the future. We also believe that higher density can be done well. We think we can create livable options with higher density housing, particularly when there's adequate greenery around or throughout the building. So such things as green roofs and green walls. So higher density doesn't mean unlivable. Higher density can be very livable, as we can see in other parts of the world. So that's what we're trying to achieve through high quality of design and an inclusion of green spaces and green walls and green roofs and linkages between these new buildings throughout our higher density neighbourhoods. Open space and natural features, of course, are critical, and open spaces are very important to any healthy built environment. So we treasure those that we've got, make them work as hard as we can for us, but also look to create linkages between them as new opportunities for recreation in open space. So those networks are as important as the open spaces themselves, because it's very difficult to create large new areas of open space in already built up areas, as we all know. And indeed, the environmental sustainability and climate change issues, of course, are uppermost in our minds with the recent flooding, but also the importance of trees in protecting us from the heat impacts of a changing climate. You can see from this image how important tree canopy is to keeping our world cool. In fact, heat is a very dangerous aspect of climate change. In 2020, more people died of heat than in car accidents in Australia. And in New South Wales, heat-related deaths contribute more than any other deaths from natural hazards put together. So all natural hazards combined are less than the deaths we suffer from heat impacts. So heat is a very important thing to protect ourselves from, which is why we're very focused on heat impact provisions and controls in the LEP and DCP. So those are quite important, very important issues that we're considering, and we're working with our local health district colleagues on trying to make sure that the LEP and DCP delivers on those. So finally, what makes you feel healthy, we asked at the beginning, and how will the neighbourhood that you live in the future contribute to your community's health and well-being over the next 15 to 20 years? So that may be something you want to add an answer on, as I say, in that chat function of the Zoom. What do you think we need to do if you believe we're not doing enough already? So your views on that are very welcome. Now we'll move on to the more detailed provisions to do with Castle Crag, which is one of our local centres in our local centre strategy. And I'm going to hand over to Ian Shillington, my colleague, who's going to talk us through all the slides for Castle Crag. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Norma. Good evening, everyone. As Norma says, I'm Ian Shillington. I'm a strategic planner working at the council, and I'm joining you tonight from home. Unfortunately, I'm in a close contact situation. So I'd like to give you a summary of the changes proposed in the LEP and DCP as they relate specifically to Castle Crag. And as a number of you, I'm sure, are aware, the key issue that was driving a lot of these changes is the local centre strategy and the vision and the recommendations that came out of the strategy. And I won't read the vision, but essentially, I guess you could summarise it. It's about protecting the unique character of Castle Crag as a centre and honouring the Walter Burley Griffin legacy while allowing for a sort of a modest level of growth that will ensure the vitality of the centre into the future. So there's a number of recommendations relating to height, increased heights and increased floor space ratios on some key sites, while also preserving the heights on other sites. Rezoning the Castle car park adjacent to the Griffin Centre to public open space, and protecting the Griffin Centre as a heritage item. Next slide, thanks, Norma. And some of the controls that are now embedded in the LEP changes that have come out of the strategy is to retain the existing B1 neighbourhood centre zone and the R3 medium density zone on the north side of Edinburgh Road. Introduce a minimum non-residential FSR control in the B1 zone, introduce an active ground floor frontage zone in the B1 zone, and concentrate height to the south of Edinburgh Road, additional height to minimise solar access and amenity impacts. And I mentioned the R3 zone properties to the north, numbers 95 to 103 Edinburgh Road, to reduce the minimum lot size from 2,500 to 1,100 square metres to allow for a development, more options for development of that area into the future under a medium density scenario. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. So there you see in laid out the summarised the LEP changes in terms of an increased FSR to north of Edinburgh Road, it changing heights and FSRs for the 100 Edinburgh Road, the quadrangle site, 11 metres on the north and down to up to 14 metres at the back as where the land drops away. The heritage item on Edinburgh Road and the postern, the postern, changing the height of building from 9 metres to 11 metres and increasing the FSR as well to 1.1 to 1. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. Concurrently, the council has considered, this is separate to the comprehensive LEP, but it's council endorsed in November 2021 a planning proposal for the quadrangle site, which a number of you may well be aware of. So this was supported by council essentially because it is consistent with the local centre strategy in relation to height and FSR. And there's a concept plan which I'll show you in a minute, which looks at a mixed-use development with commercial spaces on the ground floor and residential apartments above, and also at the rear on the ground floor. As I said, 3 stories on Edinburgh Road, dropping to 4 at the back, with a minimum of 20% of the total FSR proposed for non-residential purposes to ensure on-street activation, and also providing 1,150 square metres of publicly accessible open space on Edinburgh Road there, also linking through to the postern of the rear. Next slide, thanks, Norma. And that's a vision there of the concept plan that was submitted with the planning proposal. As I said, that's separate to the comprehensive LEP, but it's consistent with the local centre strategy, and we're hoping that will be on exhibition once we get the gateway approval from the state government in the near future. Next slide, thanks, Norma. These are more general LEP improvements, but they would apply to Castle Crag as a centre, but also its surrounding suburban areas. Removing some anomalies, a new design excellence clause, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment, a new urban heat clause, which is looking at increasing measures for sustainable built and urban design, and also the green infrastructure that Norma mentioned earlier. Removal of obsolete clauses and updating of state and local land acquisitions, such as road widening and open space. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. That's just an example there in Castle Crag of a, as I said, it's a correction where the heritage item wasn't shown as being covering 2 lots, which it should. So there'll be a minor change to the boundary of that heritage item boundary there for 233 and 233A in Road. So that's an example of one of the anomalies which has been corrected in this LEP. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. The design excellence clause, which I mentioned, will apply, is proposed to apply to all the local centres, including Castle Crag, as well as Chatswood and St Leonard's. The key thing being 4 new proposals that are above 35 metres in height, they would be subject to an architectural design competition. For proposals above 12 metres and not above 35 metres would be subject to a design excellence review panel. And that would be considered as in conjunction with the DA process for new proposals or redevelopment proposals. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. In relation to housing, Norma talked about the Willoughby housing strategy earlier. Specifically, it impacts on local centres such as the recommendations from that strategy, which are now flowing through into the proposed DCP and LEP and DCP chambers, include a recommendation for, allowing, as I said, for modest additional development in Castle Crag, including the strategy estimated potential of 74 new dwellings within the local centre. Other areas where the focus on new housing is within the Chatswood CBD and other local centres, as well as the existing medium density and high density zones, with the aim being to largely protect the existing low density and environmental living zones in the interests of maintaining housing choice and diversity. And in relation to the retail areas, the small retail areas in Castle Cove and Middle Cove, there are no changes proposed to those. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. I'll just talk briefly about the DCP and specifically its impacts on areas such as the Castle Crag local centre. Part L of the DCP proposes specific guidelines and controls for these centres. It's intended that there may be other relevant criteria and controls under parts B and D of the DCP, which relate to residential and commercial development. But any place-specific controls in Part L would prevail over those 2 parts for any developments within the local centres such as Castle Crag. Next slide, thanks, Norma. So I won't read through all this, as Norma said, the slides are available on the website. But I guess in summary, the performance criteria for Castle Crag is very much to reinforce the Griffin philosophy and design buildings that respect that philosophy, encourage green roofs and rooftop gardens, ensuring any redevelopment of the quadrangle site provides new public open space with good solar access, and maintaining active street frontages and vehicular access from Edinburgh Road to minimise vehicular access from Edinburgh Road, and maintaining deep soil zones and vegetation, existing vegetation. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. Again, Part L of the DCP includes a master plan, which has come from the local centre strategy. And again, I won't go through all the points there, but I'll show you visually in a moment. But again, it's about retaining trees, extending the curved facade of the Griffin Centre, providing a new park green space outside the Griffin Centre, providing rooftop gardens and communal open space on chop-top housing, retaining at-grade car parking areas. Yeah, so maybe if we move on to the next slide, Norma, thanks. So the master plan, as you can see there, you can see the proposed setbacks, the retention of vegetation, the new park there outside the Griffin Centre, the retention of the car park on the corner of Edinburgh Road and Eastern Valley Way, curb blisters on Edinburgh Road and also on Rayburn Avenue there, a raised curb blister there. So I guess all measures to ensure the vitality and the attractiveness of the centre into the future while allowing that modest level of growth on key sites. Thanks, Norma. Next slide. So the master plan, that's maybe move through to the next slide, Norma. As I said, the master plan, there's quite a few controls, 12 controls in all that are listed there, which I won't read through all of those. But again, it's taking it to the next level of detail and control for future development proposals that are occur in the Castle Crag local centre. Maybe move on to the final slide, just showing the proposed master plan. It's a scale of development based on that master plan. Again, just to summarise, we're looking at 3 stories on Edinburgh Road with those setbacks on the southern side being 3 metre setbacks, and then a larger setback on the northern side to sort of maintain the solar access there along Edinburgh Road there, on the footpath there and the open space area that's proposed, the plaza area that's proposed there on Edinburgh Road, and maintaining 3 stories on the northern side. You can see the block formation, the setbacks proposed. Yeah, and the parks and the car park and the link through to the postern from the quadrangle, all shown visually there, and the 3-story height limit on the postern site there, number 3, the postern. So look, that's a brief summary of all the changes proposed as they relate to Castle Crag. As I said, the detail is, there's a lot of detail in all the documentation, obviously, and you can view these slides on the website. They're currently on the website. So I'll pass you back to Norma now to talk about other LEP changes as they relate to specifically housing and other parts of Castle Crag and Castle Cove and Middle Cove. Thanks, Norma.
Thanks, Ian. That was very helpful. Thank you very much. So as Ian said, I'll talk about more general changes that we're proposing under the LEP and the DCP to do with housing. And the changes that we're introducing, the first change that's on this slide is to do with aligning the controls in the R2 zone with the exempt and complying development code set, known as the code set for short, where they talk about GFA rather than floor space ratio, which is what is currently in our LEP. So we decided that for equity reasons, because you can basically do a complying development in an R2 zone now and end up with a very different sort of development than we currently have under our LEP. So equality is what we're aiming for, equity of outcome, so that doesn't mean that people are penalised in any way by which path they choose. So that's the first change, to convert from FSR controls to GFA controls in the R2 zone. We're also introducing a new landscaping control. It's actually the control taken from our current DCP, and we're elevating it into the LEP to give it more legal strength. DCPs are more of a guideline, as the courts seem to imply. than LEPs, which of course are statutory instruments. So by elevating the landscaping controls that we have in the DCP into the LEP, this gets across the objective, which is to strengthen those landscaping controls, because we believe this is a very important element of the character of Willoughby and shouldn't be in any way downgraded or reduced in any strength. We're also seeking to amend the dual occupancy provisions also to be in line with the code SEP to allow immediate subdivision of dual occupancies and removing what is not allowed under the code SEP, which is the battle axe configuration. I'll talk about that in a little while. We're also setting a minimum lot size for this new dwelling type that was introduced by the low-rise medium density housing order in 2017 called manor houses, which are buildings which are usually 3 or 4 dwellings attached, all attached together on one lot, usually about 2 stories in height. So we've actually set a minimum lot size. The current lot size in the order is 600 square meters, and we believe that's too low. And under Cook's our R3 and R4 zones. So we've set an 1100 square meter lot size for this new manor house development that is being allowed under this new housing order. We're also proposing to change the affordable housing clause in line with the community strategic plan, where it was set to rise from 4% to 10% where feasible. So we've done some feasibility work, and we believe that we can raise that 4% to 10%, maybe not everywhere in the local government area, but certainly in a few areas. So we're putting that out also as a proposal in this current LEP and DCP, and we're seeking your observations and comments on that. To talk about the complying development SEP and the outcomes that you get from following that route and the sort of construction you get when you follow a DA route. You can see from these images on this screen, the left-hand side are those dwellings approved by complying development provisions, and the right-hand are to do with show images of houses approved under a DA route. You can see from a streetscape point of view, really there's not very much difference in terms of bulk and scale and appearance. So really, we believe that by creating a more equitable situation by moving from FSR to GFA, we won't actually result in more greater, bulkier buildings, although there will be some increase in floor space achieved if we do make this change as proposed under the LEP. So to give you some example, an idea of why we're changing this a control that's currently in the LEP for FSR, you can see that on the left-hand table, we have the controls as you rise up through the different site areas and the current FSR control and what sort of gross floor area you get. And you can see if you look particularly, for example, at the 301 to 400 square meter site area, where the current FSR control is 0.5 to 1. The achievable GFA, if you've got a 400 square meter block, is 200 square meters. But if you have a 401 square meter block and you apply the new FSR control to that, you actually come out with less GFA. So it's a rather clumsy and not a smooth sequence, not a smooth continuum in terms of FSR control and GFA. Whereas the SEP on the right-hand side of the page, the complying GFA calculation, you can see that it moves very smoothly from floor as you move up through the different site areas. So you actually get an increasing GFA as a result of the SEP controls. So we believe that's a much more sensible and logical way to go. And as I say, also provides equity between complying developments and DA sort of outcomes for housing. In terms of, this is an example that shows a comparison of FSR to GFA in a typical R2 low density area. So here we have a site area of 620.4 square meters. And under the LEP now, the maximum FSR would be 266.7. And the maximum GFA under the housing code and the draft SEP would be higher, 335 square meters. And what was actually approved was 303 under the DA approved. But you can see there will be an increase in GFA by following this. But at the same time, as I said, we are very, very keen on making sure that the landscaping control is strong. So that will actually be an increased requirement for landscaped area. If you look on the left-hand side of the page, you can see the current DCP control, which is the proposed draft LEP control for landscaped area. and take, for example, the 600 square metre site area, where you end up with a landscaped area of 240 square metres compared to the existing complying development set. We're not using their landscaping controls, the state landscaping controls, which for a 600 square metre block would only give you 120 square metres of required landscaped area. So we're actually complementing the GFA, the new GFA proposal, with a much stronger required landscaped area in the draft LEP. So your comments and submissions on that proposed change are welcome. In terms of an example, we can give you an example here of a site area of 650 with a maximum FSR under the current LEP of 279 square metres. The maximum GFA under the proposed draft LEP, which follows the housing code, would be 335 square metres, and what actually was proposed and approved was 312, but they could get 335 square metres. The minimum landscaped area that we're proposing would be 266 square metres, whereas under this complying set, which we're not bringing in or not coupling with the GFA change, would only be 195 square metres. So you can see that some figures around those examples of how we're increasing the floor space, but also at the same time increasing the landscaped area that we would require. I've just got an image here of some typical dual occupancy types. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got attached or side-by-side, or some may say semi-detached dual occupancy format on the left. And on the below, we've got detached, but both with a street frontage sorts of dual occupancy on a corner block. On the top right, we have attached, but one and above and below each other dual occupancy. And below on the right-hand side, below bottom right, you have a battle axe dual occupancy with the access down the side of the building to the front of the block. So this is the battle axe dual occupancy. You can see completely consumes the garden area at the back, with some provision for trees along the boundaries. But we believe that this sort of subdivision is actually destroying the ability for us to keep our landscaped areas strong, provide good levels of biodiversity in Willoughby, and also good opportunity for tree canopy cover. So that's why we're not supporting the battle axe provision of dual occupancy in this LEP and DCP. So in terms of changes to dual occupancy provisions, proposed GFA controls for the floor space for the side-by-side detached would remain the same as we have in the set, as well as the attached one above the other. So you'd still get a maximum that you would get under the complying developments set. But the landscaping control is actually stronger. So those are the landscaping controls for the different site areas drawn from the DCP now for our required landscaped area in the LEP. We're also proposing that subdivision for dual occupancy is immediate, whereas now we have a 5-year limit, with the intention when that was brought in to provide some affordable rental housing in the area, whereas we're not convinced that that's been proven to be the case. So we're aligning with the SEP now to say that subdivision can be immediate for dual occupancy. In terms of changes to other dual occupancy provisions, this is an example showing a site area of an example again, with a maximum FSR under the current LEP of 292 square metres, but that would rise to 482 square metres under the proposed draft LEP. So you can see there could be quite a significant increase in floor space. The landscaped area under the DCP, which will become the proposal, would have been 255.7 square metres. They actually provided more at 311. The landscaped area under the SEP would only be 265, whereas the landscaped area under the draft LEP would be 308. So we're actually going to increase the landscaping provisions, as I said, with the coupling with the GFA, the new provision for GFA. In terms of changes to dual occupancy provisions, this is another example, and maybe I'm labouring these examples too many times with too many figures swimming about in your head. but they serve to demonstrate the same purpose, that there will be more floor space available under the proposals in the LEP, but also a higher landscaped area required. And that the battle axe form of one block, one house behind another is not to be supported due to that loss of landscaped area, so that we can really make a good fist of meeting our tree canopy targets that are in our LSPS and in our CSP, and arresting any biodiversity loss, and also improving the resistance or the resilience in terms of heat island impacts. So all of those things work together. I don't think we can have battle axe dual occupancies and still achieve those things. So that's why we're ruling them out under the current proposals in the LEP. So your comments on that are also welcome. I spoke about manor houses, of course, as well. The code SEP allows manor houses in particular zones where residential flat buildings are permissible. So what we're trying to do here is set a minimum lot size, which makes the best use of this land in R3 and R4, where RFBs are allowed. So the current SEP shows a minimum lot size of 600 square meters, which I mentioned before. And what we're trying to do is create a larger space so we get a better result in these R3 and R4 zoned areas for housing delivery. In terms of affordable housing, we currently have under our LEP a 4% requirement of residential floor space in new development to be delivered as affordable housing. And there's also a bonus floor space. So if you provide 4%, you get an additional FSR, 4% FSR, to compensate, if you like, for the affordable housing you're providing. So you end up with a larger building. Under the LSPS, the document that I referred to before, the increased housing requirement will go, we're suggesting we must go from 4% to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. Well, of course, 2021 has come and gone. These things take a long time to put together. So we're aiming straight for 10% by 2026, building on that CSP requirement, the Community Strategic Plan. And the draft LEP proposal, therefore, is a 10% of residential floor space within the permissible FSR, no additional FSR. It has to be provided within the overarching FSR now, which is a change to the way it's calculated at the moment. And as I said before, feasibility is important here. We're not just blindly imposing a 10% affordable housing requirement, knowing that it will impact economic feasibility of development. So we've had some work done by SGS Planning and Economics, which is also available on the website for consideration. You can have a look at that and you'll see where 10% is likely to be possible, and maybe less is likely to be possible in other areas where the feasibility doesn't stack up. But we'll be looking at that during the course of the exhibition and be interested to hear what the community feel about that affordable housing proposal as well. I'll just touch quickly on the DCP now in terms of how that's changed. It's an enormous document. Anybody who's used it currently will know it's a vast document that is quite difficult to navigate. What we've had done to it is it's been largely rewritten and reorganized to make it more user-friendly, and now divided into 12 new parts, A to L. And Ian's already spoken about part L earlier tonight, about the place-based plans, where most of our local centres detail can be found in the new DCP, the new draft DCP. Some key changes are to do with not only making it more user-friendly, but also incorporating controls that are development-based, to do with residential development, and to do with heritage conservation areas, and R3 and R4 zones and shop top housing. So this slide is also available on the website from the previous webinar last week. So you may want to have a look at the DCP in detail yourself and see whether you think we hit the mark with the new way it's been organised and the new controls that we've included in that DCP. Our local centres, including Castle Crag, will largely be found in Part L. So if you want to see those place-based controls, they're in Part L. But for all residential development and commercial development, you'd have to look at a couple of other parts of the DCP. We've tried to make it as easy as possible to use, but you may not find yourself having to dip into a number of different sections of the DCP. We've also got other provisions in Part F to do with transport and parking. And we've also got parts G, I and J. Vegetation management has just was recently revisited in 2020, and water management in 2019, and building sustainability in 2020. So they had some recent changes done to them, and it's these new changes that you will see in the new revised DCP that's on exhibition now. So that's a quick run through, because we know many of you may have listened to the webinar last week, despite the fact it clashed with one of the Progress Association meetings. And of course, it can be viewed at your leisure on the website. You can listen to it. You can hear how Ian Arnott delivered this webinar last week compared to how I've delivered it tonight, and hear the different way we probably reflect on the different slides. There's now an opportunity for questions. But I'll just explain that if you want to find out more, there's not only this webinar, but there'll be other webinars based on other local centres, and there's a full programme of that on Have Your Say on our website. Submissions on the draft LEP and DCP can be made to that address above, or indeed you can go to the New South Wales Planning Portal, which might be a bit of a bridge too far for many of you, but it might be an interesting exploration journey if you want to try that. A submission can also be made in writing to the CEO, and it may be published online, or you can call us on the planning team or email us at email@willoughby, and we'll be more than happy to try and deal with your questions and queries. I know some of the questions may be very specific, and that's very difficult for us to have our heads across all the controls and the requirements and figures, and for many multitude of sites across Willoughby at any session like this. But if we're given time to consider, we will obviously try and answer all your questions as best we can, and provide you with the feedback that you require. The planning proposal itself, which is the draft and the draft LEP, is available on the planning portal for viewing, and it's also available, that's the web address for the planning portal. But you can also see all the documentation, of course, on Council's own website. So I'll ask if Tanya can provide me with any questions that might have come through tonight that we might want to respond to.
Thank you, Norma. We have a few suggestions that have come through, and we've requested that people put in some submissions there for some suggestions for some changes. But we do have a couple of questions we've pulled out that you might be able to answer now. One from Liz, talking about how we're talking about the tree canopy cover and biodiversity loss with the state government project to destroy a major green corridor in Flat Rock Gully, and what provisions are going to be included for sustainable building materials and modes of construction.
Well, in terms of tree canopy loss, as I explained throughout the webinar, this is a very important issue for us. So in terms of the DCP, we have a requirement when trees are lost that they are in fact replaced more than has been lost. So there's a requirement to replace, I believe, one tree with, I think it's 3 trees. Can I get confirmation on that? 3, yeah, 3 for 1. So we are determined to make sure that there's no net loss of tree canopy. And when it comes to works that the state government are proposing, we as a council will make strong submissions in relation to those proposals, and we can hope that those submissions are heard and acted on. In terms of controls to do with the materials that buildings are used for building, the basics system that state government have rolled out that deal with sustainability, the sustainability index for buildings, does cover those issues such as building construction and energy efficiency. So we'll be applying those as we must in all DAs that are received to make sure that we have a sustainable building as we possibly can. So it's very important that all these things tie together, and that we work on many different fronts to create a sustainable future for ourselves. And we believe that we've captured most of it in the LEP and DCP, but if you think we haven't captured, if things have slipped out or slipped away and we haven't got them in there to the extent that you would like to see them, then this is not a defense of what we've got. This is a plea for your submissions to improve what we've got, to make sure that we cover those things as best we can.
Thank you, Norma. The next question's from Adrian Cabos. How would the proposed change from FSR to GFA affect the Griffin Conservation Area?
Well, the conservation area wouldn't have that change applied to it, Adrienne. So this wouldn't apply to conservation areas or environmental living areas. Those controls will remain the same for those areas. So this really only applies to normal R2 zones without any conservation status applied to them. So that won't make a difference to the Castle Crag Conservation Area.
And we don't really have any more questions as such in the feed. So
well, that's wonderful to hear, because of course doing 4 people's work tonight with Ian's support, thank you Ian, has been quite a challenge, because this has been an extra webinar that we've put on for Castle Crag. So we may get an early mark tonight, which is possible. It looks like it's going to be likely. And of course, there are 2 webinars now, once this one is on the website, that you can refer to at any time in the future. And if you have any subsequent questions that you can think of that you haven't asked tonight or would like to know, just send those through to us and we'll make the best we can of answering them and making sure that you do get a response. So the draft LEP and DCP are on exhibition now until the 7th of June, which is overall a 12-week period. And the series of webinars that we're running now is about providing that local and specific detail and giving you the opportunity to ask questions of us. So the feedback we've had today and from the webinars thus far and into the future will be included in a feedback report that we will report to Council on, with any suggested amendments for the LEP and DCP around October time. So there's likely to be changes to what's on exhibition now as a result of the feedback we've got. That's the whole point of having things on exhibition, because we want to hear from the community and other stakeholders. The referral to the DPE to make the Willoughby LEP and for Council to endorse the DCP could occur later this year, as this dot point says, unless, and this looks probably quite likely, there would be a further exhibition period because of the extent of changes that we might need to make after this exhibition period. So that would be likely to happen towards the end of this year, with the finalisation of the plan and the DCP during next year, probably the first part of 2023. So that might give you a bit of a flavour of the timing. And Tanya, unless there's anything else that I need to add tonight?
No, I think you've just about covered it. We will be adding the responses to the questions within 10 working days, and anything that's of a general nature that might be of interest to other people will add to the Have Your Say Q&As.
That's great. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your attendance tonight. And please do consider submitting some feedback to us on what's on exhibition at the moment. It's very important that we hear your voice. Thank you very much.